it's that time again where I talk with national podcaster and journalist Grant Hermes from the Make It Make Sense podcast. It's Make It Make Sense with Grant Hermes. The goal of these conversations is to talk about national politics and bring it all back to Oklahoma and how it impacts Oklahomans. My name is Ryan Welton. I am the founder and curator of Oklahoma Memo. It is a daily local news recap Monday through Friday. It hits your inbox at 7 a.m. And we are officially in day 31 of the shutdown. How do I know that? Because it started October 1st. It's been a full month. How are you doing, Grant?
I mean, it's been a lot to cover this thing for the last month. Otherwise I'm good. It's Halloween. I'm ready to pass out some candy. I'm very much a one for you, one for me kind of passer outer. So I'll be awake all night on
Same.
5.
As long as I
Yeah.
get to keep the candy corn. The kids never want that. I'm like, you get the big candy bars. I'll take the candy corn. It's pure sugar, low fat. I'll eat as much as I want. I'll just be,
I I mix it with
oh, that's it. You get some protein.
I'll sit there and unshell peanuts, a little protein in there. It tastes. I grew up in Minnesota. There is a candy company called Pearson's, and they make this candy called a salted nut roll. Think a Baby Ruth bar without the caramel. It's just sugar and nougat and peanuts, and it's delicious. And that is exactly what candy corn and peanuts taste like to me. And so, I'll just roll them together and make a little thing and just munch on that all night and be like, yeah, here we go. You can take the Milky Ways. I don't like those anyway.
Fantastic. That sounds like something that I would truly enjoy. It's been a busy week. I've been checking out the Make It Make Sense podcast, and I saw you had a fascinating video earlier this week about Trump and his health and a third term and all those things.
Yeah.
Top of mind for Oklahomans right now is the shutdown. It's the SNAP benefits that are going away starting on November the 1st. And now I'm hearing that President Trump has called on Republicans to unilaterally bring the government back. What is that all about?
Yeah, so let's talk about what's happening on the 1st here. And some programs, they run out midnight on the 1st. Some programs technically run out midnight Sunday morning. But most of these things end tomorrow. And what we are talking about is SNAP benefits. That's what we would traditionally call food stamp benefits. We are talking about healthcare extensions for Affordable Care Act or Obamacare subsidies or Medicaid, Medicare subsidies that were being extended to people. Oklahoma is in the top 10 state users for those. It's top 5, I believe, for SNAP benefits, and I think it's top 7 for Medicaid expansion and ACA expansion. So a lot of people in Oklahoma use those things and depend on those things. Across the country, 1 in 5 American kids relies on SNAP benefits so they don't go hungry. Of people who are on SNAP, 1 in 3 are kids. We are also talking about not just the people who use those SNAP benefits and not being able to access food or use the ACA subsidies and won't have health insurance anymore, so won't be able to go see their doctor unless they are going to pay an arm and a leg, maybe literally, depending on the situation they're in. Not to be glib about that, but literally that's what we're talking about in some cases. This whole thing is going to raise prices on the rest of us. I mean, grocery stores depend on SNAP benefits for somewhere, depending on where you live. It could be less than 1% if it's a fancier part of town in that grocery store. But in a lot of low-income rural places, we're talking half to 2/3 of a grocery store chain's income comes from those SNAP benefits, including sometimes from their own employees. I mean, Walmart is one of the largest employers of people who are on government benefits. And a lot of them also get their groceries in those places. So we're talking about a loss of revenue for those things. That is lost wages for people who work there. That's something on the order of 400,000 jobs of just people who work in grocery stores. We're talking billions of dollars in tax revenue. So this sort of cycle of this goes back. That also means that because they're going to lose that money, prices on food are going to rise for the rest of us. And they're already at a 30-year high. So we are going to see that and feel that. And the same thing goes for insurance rates starting next year. But in a lot of places, it's already begun to happen that rates are going to double, even triple. Even if you have private insurance, you're going to see your rates go up by some amount. It could be nominal to you, but it could be, 25, 50%, depending on what your coverage is or what your health needs are. And that's all going to happen because this stuff expires tomorrow and Sunday or this weekend, let's say. And that's just those 2 big ones. And the really interesting thing right now about the SNAP benefits is that there is money to pay for that. About $5 to $6 billion in what the USDA, which is the Department of Ag, calls their contingency fund, which is meant just for this exact moment. Up until September 30th, so a day before the shutdown started, they had a memo out that was basically laying out that they had been told by their attorneys at that agency that this is exactly what this money is there for. And it was, in fact, they used the word guarantee. Said this money is guaranteed to be used for situations like this. Just before the shutdown, the USDA decides to arbitrarily change its rules, which they're allowed to do within agencies. It's just an agency rule, which they then cut out government shutdowns as reasons to use the contingency fund. And 25 states, red and blue states, are suing. I don't think Oklahoma is one of them, but I don't remember off the top of my head right now. But I'm pretty sure it's not. But they're suing, and a judge yesterday heard this case in Massachusetts, and this judge basically said, this doesn't make any sense. You don't get to let people, she said, literally drop dead because you're playing a game somewhere. And it's also worth noting that in 2018, 2019, when we had our last longest shutdown, which was 35 days under the first Trump administration, USDA tapped into this same fund again to not let SNAP expire like this. So this is a choice that's being made here, and one that they made because they saw a shutdown looming. And that is going to play out in court. But in the meantime, people are not going to know where the next meal is coming from. A lot of people, we're talking 42 million people.
One of the fascinating things about this discussion, and I've sort of like, at the end of the day, I start thinking about how might this shutdown end, and I thought about John Thune, Senator Thune, being stranded at National Airport, and I thought, well, the inconvenience of elected officials will play into it. There's going to be such a blowback to the ending of SNAP benefits, even temporarily, for families who are unable. It's not that they can't afford any food. It's that they can't afford the food that they need for their family for a week or for a month. But one of the really disturbing things I'm starting to see in the discourse are people like Glenn Beck, who this morning I saw a video on X saying, "Why are so many people on SNAP? What's wrong with people?"
Geez, yeah. I mean, that's a really common argument, and it is a lot, and it's made by like the most callous people to give permission to the people that are generally decent people to be as callous as possible in these situations. The majority of people who use SNAP benefits, and I'm talking like more than 2/3, are working, whether it's part-time or full-time. In fact, the majority of them do work full-time. I think it's like 45% work full-time. That actually might be a little low. It might be more than that. It might be more like 65% work full-time who use these Medicaid expansion benefits. We are talking about people who struggle to meet ends meet. We are talking about people who are struggling to make ends meet. And that is a larger conversation about things like the minimum wage, about allowing companies as big as like Walmart, like the example I used earlier, to pay people so little that they have to be on SNAP benefits despite working, a full 40-hour week. That is a larger conversation about what this country wants to do about valuing certain labor and certain kinds of things. What do we consider to be jobs at that point? Is it just jobs for tax revenue for a government, state, or federal? Is it just for the revenue brought in to the company, or is it a job in which we want people to be able to survive without needing government assistance here? There's also the line you're hearing from people right now, too, that there are so many people on these benefits because they're all undocumented immigrants, although more and more frequently we're just seeing people say immigrant. They're just skipping over the illegal part or the undocumented part and they're just saying immigrant. And it's really important to note that, for starters, undocumented immigrants are not allowed to have ACA or Medicaid at all. They are barred from it by law. So they just cannot get it. Second, when it comes to SNAP benefits, 98% of people who use SNAP benefits are citizens. 88% are U.S. born. That is from the latest USDA numbers. I looked it up yesterday, and it stuck in my head because it was so astronomical. Only something like 5% or so of the overall total of this stuff comes out to be non-citizens and or refugees. And I know that those two numbers, when you put them together, don't actually make 100%, but the USDA has to pull from a couple pools to put those numbers together, so that's why it doesn't do that. But even if you take those things on their face as being from maybe separate pools of people and data, we're still talking about, fewer than 10% of people on these benefits who, aren't American. And that is, so it's just kind of the wrong approach to be like, well, why are so many of these people on here, as if it's on them for being lazy or being takers. This is such an old argument at this point. It's 40 years old. This is from the Reagan administration old. And not to call you old, Brian. But
I was not part of the Reagan administration.
But like this thing has been said for so long, and it just turns out to not be true in the extreme way that all of these people talk about. But it is an excuse for people to behave callously toward their neighbors. And I think, like you said, that is a disturbing, upsetting part of where we're heading right now, in a moment when we should be leaning on one another. Those who can should, in these moments, support the people who cannot. And, that is the Oklahoma standard. And it's a shame that there are going to be a lot of people who are going to fall on a side against that.
We are seeing in Oklahoma a number of people. There's a Be a Neighbor campaign. There was a call from Governor Stitt for Oklahomans to be more charitable, even though there is a rainy day fund. And with an emergency declaration, the Cherokee Nation, Chief Hoskin, they declared an emergency. The tribes are doing this right, but the state won't declare an emergency to be able to tap into that rainy day fund. I saw State Senator Andy Fugate talk about this on social and how this could work. And it's possible that Oklahoma could dip into those funds. And you noted how many people are dependent upon SNAP benefits. And I do think that there's going to be blowback, enough so that it's going to, even if they are shadow negotiations, cause Democrats and Republicans to get together and talk about this. But President Trump has asked the Republican senators, the Republican congresspeople, to say, you know what, forget these negotiations. Unilaterally bring them back, force them back to the table. How would that work, and what does that mean?
Yeah. So I'm gonna take this in three parts really quickly here, because we are seeing pushback in a lot of these states, red and blue, over what is going to happen this weekend and how many people are going to be harmed by this weekend. In the run-up to this weekend, this week, we have been seeing what you just described as shadow negotiations between rank-and-file members of the Senate. So people who are not in the leadership, and the way that matters here is that they aren't the people who are constantly in contact with the White House. So they can kind of fly under the radar a little bit, let's say. And both Democratic and Republican rank-and-file members have been flying under the radar to have these shadow negotiations, which shows that there are sort of cracks here, because they all know that a tidal wave of anger is coming their way after these benefits expire. Trump obviously sees this and then says, you know what, take the nuclear option here and blow this thing up. And this is sort of one of the few last holdouts really in the Senate where there is a 60-vote threshold. The Senate is 100 members. Normally, obviously, majority then is 50 plus 1. And we've blown up this 60-vote threshold on a lot of things, including confirmations for certain cabinet members and also for federal judges. And that used to be unheard of. And the kind of last stand of this is these budget fights. And the reason that the Senate is put in place like this is so that you don't have one party who gets control by one vote and then can upend everyone's apple cart. And it is meant to force the Senate, which is, often called the world's greatest deliberative body, which in this moment, it certainly isn't that. But it's meant to force senators to come to the table, to talk with each other, to compromise. There is an old saying, too, and maybe this will trigger some sort of civics teacher in your brain, but like if the if the House of Representatives is the roiling teacup of hot tea, then the Senate is supposed to be the cooling saucer you place it on. And that's why this 60 vote threshold is there for these massive budget things. And Trump's saying, you know what, Mike Johnson, call the House back, because no one in the House, your representatives, have been on vacation for the last 30 days, 31 days, because he sent them home because he said, we did our job. We passed our version of a budget. It's now in the Senate's hands, and everyone can go home. Trump is saying, Mike, bring everyone back. He's telling John Thune, the majority leader for the Republicans in the Senate, override this vote and force through that this is just going to be a majority vote only on budgets, and blow this thing up. And the reason this hasn't stuck around, or this hasn't been done before, I should say, is because everybody is nervous about what the other side will do when they're in power. The reason that all these fights have happened going back for the last decades or so here at this point, I mean, it's more than almost 20 years that this real fight started happening, is over losing these thresholds, is because what happens when the other side is in power? It's short-sighted thinking, and it forces you in a future minority party to give up leverage that you would need here, which the Democrats are certainly using in the Senate right now, because they need 7 votes. So the 7 Democrats have to cross party lines to vote with Republicans, which is a lot of people in this current climate. But, if it's 1, or in this case, if it's none, then Democrats have no power at all here, or the minority party in this case has no power. So it's a real blowing up of what we would consider to be pretty normal work within the Senate. In any normal time, senators, regardless of who was in power or not, regardless of which party was in the White House or not, would bridle at this, because it is the president sticking his finger in their pie. And it's interesting that Trump floats this thing out there. It's sending off alarm bells on Capitol Hill and offices in the Senate. We'll see if John Thune actually does this, because, like I said, with those shadow negotiations, we are getting some pushback, some cracks in the Trump wall of support for the president on these things, because it's starting to feel like to a lot of folks that maybe the president has the president in mind when he does these things, and maybe as Republicans, we're not getting everything we want for towing this line. Maybe this is sort of the beachhead of this thing. That is, some tea leaf reading, so it's not exactly like we're getting that directly from senators right now or representatives, but it is pretty clear that once we get into this kind of territory of blowing up this 60 vote threshold, when we get there because the president wants it, some senators are kind of looking sideways at the White House.
Senators were there when President Obama was in office, when President Biden was in office. There will be Democrats in the presidency again. This is all cyclical. And, as soon as you have a Democratic president and a Democratic Congress, they should expect that this would be used against them if they do this. One of the things that you mentioned that I think is fascinating, that I remember from civics class, is that it's the House of Representatives that represent the constituency. Whatever you're elected, whatever your constituency thinks, that's what you fight for. Senators are not that. Senators are supposed to be thinker. Think House of Lords as opposed to House of Commons. And they're supposed to be above it. And I see Senator Langford navigating that pretty constantly. And this week, he came out and said, this is a different topic now, moving to sort of like geopolitical stability with regard to the alleged drug boat traffickers. I presume they probably are, but I don't know that. But he said, and of course, for anybody who doesn't know, the United States has summarily executed people on boats who are allegedly bringing drugs into the United States, whether they are or whether they are not. The president really hasn't consulted Congress about this. He's done this unilaterally. And Senator Langford came out this week, and I don't know if it was a mistake politically on his part. Maybe he got in trouble by the president, but he said he would have been apoplectic if President Biden had done this without consulting
Yeah.
Congress first. What can you tell us about that, Grant? And why is consulting Congress in a situation like this important?
Sure. I mean, so like Langford is basically saying I'd be beside myself if this was Biden doing this, and he's maybe not saying that he's beside himself now, but like when he said that, it certainly seemed that way, that he's beside himself over this thing, over not being in on this. And I think the thing that you actually in explaining what's going on here kind of explained what Langford is going through right now, which is this idea that like we don't know who these people are in these boats because you are blowing them up without due process, which is generally how this works. And Trump said when he was asked last week if they were to declare war on Venezuela. He was like, "No, but I think we are just going to kill people a little," which is a wild thing for any president to say. I mean, think about listeners, if you are, for this presidency or you are against President Obama, let's say, think about how beside yourself and how beside themselves Republicans were when Obama was unilaterally using drone strikes and carrying those out in the Middle East. Rightfully so, without really telling Congress. So Langford is on the Intelligence Committee. He's not the head of it, but he is part of it. And what has to happen by law, by an intelligence oversight law from like 1980, the president has to inform what's called the Gang of Eight, which is the leaders of Congress and then the four members of the Intelligence Committee, as well as a few others. And what it says is that the president has to inform Congress about potential intelligence activities and anticipated activities. And right now, it is very unclear if those things are happening. And now, Langford would be in on these conversations. Those conversations happen in black box rooms with the president or with someone like Pete Hegseth or the CIA director John Ratcliffe or whoever. But then those things get disseminated to members of the Intelligence Committee who have a higher level of trust given to them by the American people, by their own parties, by the opposing parties, that they're going to do the right thing here. And Langford basically saying we need Congress to know more things about what's happening right now, because Trump has also said that what we're going to kind of do here is engage with Venezuela in a non-international armed conflict, which is a specific legal term from the Geneva Convention and the UN, which is an interesting way to think about this because the president has declared Venezuela as a narco state. So a failed state that doesn't actually operate as a real government anymore, and therefore it's not an international conflict, which means we aren't, closer to a war. It's much more along the lines of like fighting Al Qaeda than it is Iraq, and that's a pretty dubious definition. I will say, like, foreign policy is not exactly where I live all the time, but in talking to people who do, it's a pretty hard sell on the international stage to say that Venezuela is a narco state when a state like, let's say a place like even like China, which ships a lot of manufactured fentanyl to the U.S., isn't also then a narco state. Like it's a weird thing that's happening here. Like if they're going to be that loose about the definition, then like what are these definitions good for? But basically, Trump's saying that we're going to be in this sort of non-international armed conflict is kind of like, hey, we're going to have a little bit of war as a treat, and it's a weird time for that to be happening right now, and for Langford to be like, hey, we need more information about this because if you're planning a full-scale operation against what is effectively another nation here, like it is in South America, then we need to know. And there are already talks about Trump approving certain CIA operations within Venezuela to try to destabilize the regime that's there. And he refused to say that that could work its way up to an assassination of the president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, right now. And all of this, too, folds back then on what the White House wants to do on immigration, because for months, even before Trump was president, they had been painting this gang, maybe cartel called Tren de Aragua from Venezuela as this like arm of the Venezuelan government that has invaded the United States, and that's why they're doing all of these raids and allowed to do certain things, and why they're allowed to, in certain places, send the military into places. They haven't used that as an argument for actually deploying troops yet, but it's like a thing that they talk about. And if the United States is in this sort of non-international armed conflict with Venezuela, they're going to draw a through line from that to what's happening domestically. And like that seems to be what they're kind of lining up here. It is it's a lot of dominoes they're setting up. It is a lot of sort of like chess moves on this thing. It is pretty clear this is happening um, directly out of Stephen Miller, who was the deputy chief of staff, and his real issue is he just doesn't like immigrants or migrants in general. He's been very public about that, and it is creative in this way. We'll call it cunning
Yeah,
in
I
this way.
appreciate you,
Yeah.
calling it creative, because the thing that I've been reading and thinking about is that while most of America might say, heck yeah, kill the drug smugglers, what if this isn't about drugs at all? When we've heard
Yeah.
President Trump and heard about his dealings with China, it often comes back to like rare earth metals and his acquisition of, it's like he's playing Monopoly here, trying to gather all the hotels and houses and all of, everything that he can. But might this really just about be being about destabilizing the Venezuelan government so that we can collect all the oil?
Yeah, absolutely. It is not unlike using 9/11 to go into Iraq. Like it is not unlike sort of the smoke screen of reasons that may or may not be there to invade a country or to attack a country to destabilize it for what's beneath their feet. And in a large way, and this is actually a piece that I'm working on right now for the Make It Make Sense Substack, is that Trump is also been sort of this prospector president where he's like really focused a lot on divining where rare earth minerals are and how can we get our hands on them. And while they are important, like I'm not going to downplay that, say that we don't need those things, because we do. And we certainly need oil right now because we are still fully in a fossil fuel world. It is interesting that he would do this in that way, and it's just a part of this pattern. So I think that is actually there. The interesting thing, too, when it comes to energy, then, is destabilizing Venezuela might actually undercut American energy in a way, because if it makes Venezuelan oil cheaper, it would make them compete more with what we're producing here in the United States. And we've actually never been producing more natural gas or oil in American history. We are technically energy independent, but that's not how the world works. So like, it's not, we're not just going to live off our own oil, because that's not how these companies work. But, certainly in a state like Oklahoma, if we are talking about oil and gas and you destabilize a pretty large oil producer in Venezuela, that's going to mess with jobs and prices in Oklahoma. That's why you should care about this thing. You should care about it for reasons, too, because we are talking about drug trafficking, and states like Oklahoma have struggled with things like fentanyl and methamphetamine, although they're not really bringing methamphetamine. But also, you should then also care about these strikes and the president being really unclear about who these people are in these boats, how they know who they are, and why they're firing on them, and whether they have taken into account all the consequences of firing on these boats. You should care about that, because you should care about the American military walking up to the edge of an armed conflict, because that's not good for anyone.
Every action has an equal reaction. We talked about tariffs on soy and how it's impacting beef ranchers, cattle ranchers, and
Mhm.
a lot of these things that he's wanting to do for whatever aspirations he's having are having negative impacts they're having unintended consequences on ranchers and then eventually on oil companies. And it essentially, when you think about the shutdown and when you think about these stories, do you sense that the American public and Congress maybe are starting to figure out that really President Trump editorializing here is just in it for President Trump?
Yeah, I think we're starting to see some of those things. I think we're starting to see some of those revelations happening here. I think we're going to see that in the pushback and the blowback from, people losing food stamp benefits, from prices going up, from healthcare prices going up, health insurance prices going up. Kind of no matter what happens with that now, that's going to happen. And then when you get to people who are members of, the military or their Gold Star families, or they are people who takes their service really seriously, uh, they're gonna feel these things, and you could kind of start to see people coming around to this thing. And for a long time, going back to Trump's first run 10 years ago at this point, there were a lot of political commentators and political experts who were looking at this and basically being like, the Republican Party is making a really specific bargain. And at that point in time, it was kind of unclear if that was going to be some sort of like bargain to take the party in a new direction in a light way or like a Faustian one. And depending who you talk to now, people are still having that argument. I think the broader, decision that people come down on is that was much more of a Faustian bargain, that the party has changed and moved pretty far away from what it was, even under George W. Bush, to what is now the party of Donald Trump. And a lot of Republicans, a lot of supporters of the president have spent the last decade supporting him because they see him as a means to their own ends in their own states. And in the last 10 months, but really in the last 3, we are getting a pretty clear glimpse that that might be running out. They might now not be getting the things that they think are their ends. And if that happens to enough people in enough places, and really starts threatening the seats of Republican members of Congress, of Republican senators, you're going to start seeing some people start to push back because now there's no point in using Trump as a means to their own ends. We'll see what happens with that. Trump's approval ratings right now are low. A YouGov poll came out this week. He's got like 39%, which is right around what we consider to be his basement of support, as low as he can go. But people are unhappy with this right now. They're unhappy with the shutdown. They're unhappy with how Trump has been managing the federal government. They are unhappy about the East Wing teardown. They are unhappy with Republicans in general. They are unhappy with the way that Trump has sort of, ridden roughshod over Congress and over the Supreme Court. And so if those numbers continue to sink, we could really see some people start to turn on the president here. And we're not even a full year into his presidency. We're not even a full year to when he was elected. We'll see what happens next with that. Trump is famously Teflon for these things. A thing could happen. Democrats could, step on a rake and mess that up for themselves. Because in this moment, if you're a Democrat, you are hoping to step back a little bit and let, this party that you're up against and this president you're up against tear itself apart. But Democrats being Democrats don't really tend to leave well enough alone. And so, there's a thing that could bring these people back into this fold as Republicans. But before we go, because I know we're kind of getting a little long here, I do want to talk about the shutdown on the Democratic side of this thing, because that's important. Because right now, about a third of Americans are blaming Democrats for the shutdown. It's something like 45% are blaming Trump and the Republicans for this thing, but those numbers have held pretty steady. A few more are starting to blame Democrats than Republicans right now, but we're kind of in this middle space where it's sort of a push we pull you. And the big thing that Democrats have been fighting for is an extension to these Medicaid and Affordable Care Act subsidies. Those expire this weekend. If that's their bargaining chip, I don't know what they do next. I don't know what they pivot to. I think once those things are done, a lot of people in the American public are going to be like, well, we lost it. Even if we wanted it, we lost it. And so now we don't have that thing. So I don't know what's going to happen on that. The betting markets right now have the end of the shutdown at November 18th. That's a long way off. That is a week before Thanksgiving. That is a week before the start of peak shopping season for Christmas. If the government is still shut down after that, we are in a entirely different ball game of hurt for a lot of people. So it will be interesting to see what the Democrats say this weekend after they lose their big, uh, fighting stance here, their big chip. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't think anybody does at this point. I think a lot of Republicans are waiting for Trump to get back from his trip to Asia to figure out what to do next. But we'll see.
Grant Hermes from the Make It Make Sense with Grant Hermes podcast. One of the interesting things, as you were talking about this weekend, is coincidentally, Oklahoma's playing Tennessee this weekend, and YouTube TV and Disney have had a falling out, which means no ESPN, no ABC on YouTube TV. I will bet that induces more of a reaction in Oklahomans than this much more serious situation with regard to SNAP and Medicaid. Folks, we kind of ran out of time here, but I want to encourage you to go find Make It Make Sense with Grant Hermes and listen to his episode about President Trump and maybe the toning down of his claims that he might go after a third term. Mike Johnson this week said that, you know what, it's not really in the cards. This isn't going to happen. It feels like maybe a passive-aggressive way for Congress to say, yo, you got 3 years, maybe get this under control. But it was a really fascinating episode. I want everybody to go listen to it. And I've created a mnemonic for myself, Grant. It's Mims News Pod. Because I find that if I type in Make It Make Sense with Grant Hermes, it's like I know it comes up for me. But for other people, it might be a little difficult. If you just think Mims News Pod, you will find it everywhere. And you have a newsletter now. Where can people find that?
I do. You can find that on Substack. It is also under the Make It Make Sense. You can find it under Mims Substack too. If you search that, it'll come up. That is a weekly wrap-up newsletter right now. So you get all the stuff that I've done this week in case you missed it. On Wednesdays, I do original reporting, and this week it is reporting of the 100-page report about the Biden auto pen scandal that Republicans and Trump have been talking for years at this point about. This report's finished. It is compelling. It is thrilling. It also lacks a lot of evidence. And I go through all of that, so you don't have to read the 100 pages yourself. I did that, and I thought it was really interesting, but that is also behind the paywall. The weekly wrap-up is for free. I have another newsletter coming out, hopefully in about a month here, that will be for free. That is going to be right up your listeners' alley. So if they subscribe now for free, they'll get access to that right away. Before we go, Ryan, I want to say one more thing about the shutdown here, and it's that food banks need your help. I'm not being paid for this at all. It's find your local food bank, find the pantry near you. They need non-perishables. They need canned food that can be opened without a can opener. Pouches of tuna and chicken are great for this. Kid-friendly food if your parents, you know what kids like. Cereal, pantry staples like flour and sugar, shelf-stable milk, baby formula, period products, hygiene products are all so crucial right now and will be for the next few months. And I said at my show yesterday, if you have the time and means to volunteer and donate, a little bit will go a long way for these people. And in this moment when so many people are going to get hurt, are going to need our help, this is when we got to step up and do this
100%.
thing.
Charity begins at home. In Oklahoma, we've got the Regional Food Bank of Oklahoma. I forget the exact name of the version of that in eastern Oklahoma, but I will tell you, a good buddy of mine that I served on the Gaylord alumni board of directors with, he's now the president, Matt Marks. He runs the OU food pantry. So I'll tell you, if you're a Sooner fan and you're in Norman, hit Matt up. I will make sure you know how to get food to him. This is the time when we all need to step it up. Grant Hermes from Make It Make Sense with Grant Hermes. Thank you so much. And for those of you, this is Oklahoma Memo. This is a daily local news recap. I started in January. We're headed toward 1,000 subscribers. I basically take the best vetted journalism from across Oklahoma. I am the sports center to the games you watch. So why not get it all in one place? You can sign up for this at oklahomamemo.com. Grant, until next week.
I'll see you next week, Ryan.